Welcome back, guys. It is Championship Racing once again here at SARCO. This is round number 7 of our GTE Open Class Open Setup Championship. We head to Circuit de Spa Franco Champs. We're on the GP course and we have 40 minutes with a 10-minute qualifier. Sit back and enjoy the highlights of this Tier 1 race, brought to you proudly by Thrustmaster and Mettlestate. So we did have 15 cars that were getting ready to line up, but we had some difficulties with some of the guys getting themselves disconnected while we were in the practice. So unfortunately our lobby of 15 was reduced down to 12, and we did have this little incident that happened where both Jakes and Marius came together just coming out of the top of Radion. You see a little clip of the back, what we had all agreed to let Jakes go ahead and get himself repaired before the start of the race. The starting lineup was as follows. So Jakes, he found himself in pole position. In a second place, that was Marius in his Aston Martin. Third place, that went to Jacques Racing. You can see he too getting a little bit of contact on that formation lap. We then move over to the fourth place driver, and that was Shane, really putting in a great lap to get himself on the second row. In fifth place, that is the Canary Yellow 4GT of Ross. Sixth place is Jacques in his 69 4GT. Moving back, and Theo in the Porsche, he puts himself a 7th on the grid. Right next to him is Ashley in the 34 Ford GT. Marshall puts himself 9th in his 61 Corvette, and he's just ahead of Duppy in his 24 GT. Dylan puts himself 11th on the grid, the last to qualify, and we get Christopher to start at the back, needing to rejoin the race without a qualifying. So the guys start getting themselves in position after their formation lap. All the drivers bunching together, going at 80 kilometers an hour. Jakes will cross under the bridge, and we are officially racing round number 7. All the drivers opting to go a single file. That's Shane going very sideways as he hit that inside curb. But everyone, it seems to be safely through there, just having a look down the back, no incidences. So still 40 minutes to go of this race. Well, there's Jacques weaving left and right, trying to get some heat into his tires as we break into turn number 7. Shane going a little bit slow on that power, getting it very sideways. Out of turn number 9, down towards turn number 10. Jakes, Marius, Jacques, Shane, Ross, Jacques, Theo, Ashley, Marshall, Duppy. That's Christopher trying to go around the outside, and he will put himself on the inside of both Dylan and Duppy. So Christopher will get himself 2 positions, and that's Ross. He seems to have dropped back. He was up in 5th place, and now he's down into 9th position. Well, that's Shane stopped in the middle. That was a little bit of lag, but you see Christopher having to go a very wide line, thinking that Shane was stopped there. Duppy is now losing out to Dylan. Dylan puts himself on the inside as they come through turn number 14. Back to the race leaders, and Jakes is starting to open a gap ahead of Marius, with Jacques Racing just behind Marius. They'll go flat out through turn number 17, now flat out through turn number 18, 260 kilometers an hour. Oh, Shane going a little bit sideways, leaving behind him a little trail of smoke. That's actually looking to the inside here on Theo, coming into the second last corner, turn number 19. That looked like Marshall was able to get himself on the inside of Ross. So across the line, that is actually looking to the inside of Theo into turn number 1, and what was that? Just a little look at the replay, you can see that no cars near him, and it just seems like you shall not pass, and he goes floating into the air. Do want to have a look and see what it looked like from the inside of Ashley's cockpit. You can see He had turned in committed, and all of a sudden he was just floating as if he wasn't going anywhere. On board with Jacques Racing, coming through turns 4 and 5. Jacques was complaining that the straight line speed of this Ferrari wasn't really up to scratch compared to the other vehicles, but I do not see there being any problem here. Jacques having a look around the outside coming into turn number 7. Morris touches that inside curb on 8, that slows his exit. Little look on the outside, Morris goes very defensive coming into turn number 10. Jacques puts himself completely on the outside for turn 11. He has to back off, has to let Marius go through. We jump back to Ross, and he has Christopher all over the rear. Ross getting a little bit defensive, coming down the hill, turn number 10. Ross still trying to hang on there, but Christopher definitely looks to be the faster of the two. Through turn 12, Ross looks to defend that outside line. I thought that he would tighten up. Christopher using as much of the track as possible, making use of those curbs. Ross is a little bit sideways with him coming into turn number 13. There's Marshall going a little bit wide. I think that's going to impact his run. Dylan might have a quick look here. You can see Dylan coming out of turn, and number 15 gets right up behind Marshall. Will go around the outside of him on 16. And Marshall looked to have just moved over, possibly getting that slowdown penalty, and Dylan taking advantage. Let's go back to the front, and this is Jacques Racing moving to the inside into turn number 1. Unfortunately, Marius leaving way too much space on that inside, leaving it completely unprotected, and an easy overtake for Jacques Racing in the end there. So Jacques now finds himself in second place with Marius down in third, as Jakes leads them up through turns 3, 4 and 5. But there's Jakes going right up against the wall. He's obviously lost it on the replay, almost touches that curb but gets it very unsettled coming out of turn 5 and straight into the wall. And it seems Jakes was not the only Corvette to do that. Christopher doing it very similar, just being able to keep it away from Ross, but does find himself backwards on the wall. That means we now have a new race leader. Jacques Racing finds himself starting to pull a gap away from Marius. We'll look at those current positions. So Jacques Racing leads with Marius in second place. There's Shane in third, Mal Jacques in fourth place with Theo fifth. Ross is in sixth with Dylan Downey in seventh place. Duppy is eighth, Marshall ninth, Christopher in 10th place with the Jakes in 11th, and Ashley unfortunately having to retire. So the battle for third and fourth place is between Shane and Mal Jacques. Really great to see these two drivers fighting right at the top here. Shane doing extremely well in his Ford GT. I'm sure Mal Jacques is going to have some questions for him later in this race. Then there's another battle further down, and this is between 5th and 6th place. Ross starting to close up that gap on Theo, with Theo going a little bit wide coming through turn number 18. Ross putting himself on the inside, showed a little feint there. Ross is deep, that's going to help Dylan start closing the gap on him. There's Dylan now coming out of turn number 20. I'm sure this battle is going to heat up a little bit later. Christopher making Marshall very uncomfortable coming through turns number 12. Well, Marshall touches the inside curb, that's going to slow him down. Christopher moving to the outside, going a little bit off the track. That gives him the place. So Christopher now moves himself up the field with the Duppy just in front of him. Well, Christopher's rear is a little bit wide. That allows Marshall to come straight back at him. But Marshall is slow out once again, and Christopher keeps that position. Ross in his canary yellow Ford GT starting to close up here on Theo. Theo the only Porsche in this field today. Theo's exit was much better than the 4 GTs. So Theo will be able to open that little gap. Ross feinting to the inside to show Theo that he is there. But Theo's managed to pull that gap away, so I'm sure he will have the advantage coming down the Camel Straight and won't have Ross following him through there. Just as expected, Jacques starting to close up here on Shane. Down the Camel Straight into turn and number 7. That rear on Shane's car is looking extremely loose. And down the hill, turn and number 10. And Jacques probing, looking for some weaknesses, but not able to find any just yet. We take a look at our current race leader, that is Jacques Racing. In doing so, let's take a look at the current positions. So Jacques Racing, he leads with Morris in 2nd place. Shane, he's in 3rd with Jacques just behind him in 4th. Theo is still battling in 5th with Ross behind him in 6th place, with Dylan closing the gap in 7th. Duppy is in 8th with Christopher in 9th place, Marshall's 10th, and Jake's down in 11th position. We now see that Theo has been able to get himself a little bit of breathing space between himself and Ross. But Ross has Dylan in the background now to contend with. Dylan starting to close up that gap. Ross a little bit sideways, coming off the curb at turn number 14. Played it a lot safer that time. Saw he just rode that curb out. But he does seem to have been given a great exit speed. He has pulled himself a smaller gap away from Dylan, but he's definitely closing up here on Theo. Flat out through turn and number 18. A sideways slide there for Ross. Little flash of the lights to show Theo that he's there. Will he look to the inside into turn number 19? No, he doesn't. Goes a little bit too deep. And Theo will hold that place as Ross runs himself wide out of turn 20. Shane is really in a great position, currently in 3rd place. And you can see he looks like he's been managing that gap between himself and Amal Jacques. Down through 3, 4 and 5. Seems like cameraman was caught sleeping on the job there. That's not a great picture. You had one job, Tim. You had one job. Back to the action. Down the Camel Straight towards turn and number 7. Seems that Shane has fixed that line. He was a little bit too deep coming into turn number 7. He seems to have sorted that out. Now down the hill, turn number 10. Ease that throttle and the rear is gone. And Shane has put himself up against the wall. That's allowed Jacques to go past. Shane trying to get back on the track. You can see he's definitely going to have some damage there. That car is definitely not going straight. And here comes Theo and Ross. It will then be a matter of time for Theo and Ross to overtake him. But I do think that Shane would probably need to go and get this damage repaired in the pits. On board with Dylan into the braking zone here. Turn number 19. Little luck up for Dylan, goes a little bit wide. But you can see he's definitely closed that gap down. There we saw Shane in the background. Shane needing to go into the pits. So Shane unfortunately will lose these 3 positions, dropping from 3rd place. That will put him in 9th position. Hard on the brakes into turn 1. Ross is wide. That's going to help Dylan close the gap even more. Through turn number 2. Now down through a Rouge, then up through a Radeon. Dylan's gone a little bit wide. Whoa, manages to catch it on the outside. Back on the Camel Straight. Let's catch up with our race leader, Jacques Racing, coming out of turn number 8. Now through turn number 9. Really looking good out there. Let's look at the positions. And as we do that, Jacques Racing puts himself into the wall. So Marius will now come past as the race leader. Jacques will drop down into 2nd. There's Jacques in 3rd. I'm sure he's going to catch him. Theo, he's in 4th place with Ross in 5th. Dylan is in 6th place with Christopher in 7th. Duppy down in 8th place, Marshall 9th. Shane, he's in 10th place with Jakes in 11th position. Jacques, definitely the fastest person around this track this afternoon. And unfortunately, there we see him losing it coming out of turn number 9. The car oversteering, putting him into the wall. Very similar incident like we saw with Shane. And that is Amal Jacques down in 3rd place. He's going to close up this gap very quickly. Now through turn number 16, we'll see the straight line speed. Jacques Racing will definitely have a disadvantage here, where Jacques in the 4GT will just go straight past him. So I do think that that is a sign for Jacques Racing to head to the pits to try get some repairs done on that Ferrari. As he brakes for turn number 19, there we see he straightens out into the pits. The Canary Yellow 4GT goes too deep into turn number 19. That allows Dylan to close up that gap. Just behind Dylan, that's Christopher in the grey Corvette. Theo currently in 4th place with Ross 5th, Dylan 6th and Christopher in 7th place. Now into turn number 1. Dylan takes a much wider, later turn in. Down through turn number 2. Now through Rouge and Radeon. We'll have a backwards view. Looked like Dylan cut that corner ever so slightly, but he definitely has got the run here on Ross. He moves to the outside, Ross defends. Dylan moves back to the inside with enough of the straight line speed momentum onto the brakes into turn 7. Dylan is able to make that stick, but then we have Christopher on the outside, so he'll now stick it up the inside and Ross will now fortunately fall back. Ross moves off the track unfortunately and loses 2 position. The action still continues with Dylan coming through turn number 5, and our cameraman once again sleeping on the job, but we should catch them coming down the Kemmel Straight out of turn number 6. That is Theo in 2nd place, Dylan's in 3rd with Christopher in 4th with Ross in 5th. So extremely tight action here with at least 20 minutes of this race left to go. Dylan getting that rear a little bit sideways as he exited out of turn 9. Through turn number 10, a much tighter line there for Christopher. Dylan's on the curb, but safely off. Dylan getting as much of that curb as possible before turning in turn number 12. And a much tighter line there for Dylan. And Christopher this time around, he too is very tight, as opposed to needing to go around the outside as he has in the last couple of laps. But this is Christopher now starting to close on Dylan. I'm pretty sure Dylan can start feeling that pressure. Now out through turn number 16. Christopher losing the rear, coming out of turn number 5 earlier on in this race, has managed to buckle down and definitely getting his laps together. A little bit wide there for Christopher. Big lock up there for Dylan. That inside front tire definitely locked up there. You could see that trail of smoke. But they will cross the line. Dylan does hold this position for now. So we're still following this action for a 2nd, 3rd, 4th and 5th in the background with Ross. Now into turn number 7. We'll focus on Christopher. Out through turn number 9. down the hill into turn number 10. Theo been able to hold both his Corvettes behind him. Now out through turn number 11. Dylan's gone a little bit wide. He's lost the rear. Just catches it, clips up against the wall. But that's going to allow Christopher to go past. So Christopher up to third. Dylan is now down to fourth position. And just because you are further down the field does not make you safe. We just saw Jacques Racing come past. That's Shane. Then we have Mal Jacques and then Jakes. So a three-way battle happening further down the field. We're definitely going to need to keep our eye on this action as well. And just as we say that, Jakes makes a move to the inside into turn number 10. Jacques keeps enough space but holds his line on the wider. Jakes is on the inside, but that will not put Jacques the inside for turn number 11. Jakes has to let Jacques go past. Jakes sucks in behind him through turn number 11. A little bit of dancing there for Shane. Little glitching. We can see that definitely put Jacques out. And Jacques tried to avoid him, but he actually wasn't there. It was a glitch. And unfortunately, Jakes taking advantage of that and moving himself up a position ahead of Jacques. So Theo still has Christopher to contend with down through turn number 5. You can see the sun is starting to set. The lights are on. And it is definitely making visibility very tricky. Coming out of turn number 12, you're driving straight into the sun. In the background, that was Ross in his Ford GT. He unfortunately losing out on some of the pace. And Dylan, he too, after collecting the wall on the outside, he too has started dropping back. But I'm sure Theo will be relishing in this opportunity. Currently holding second place. Well, there's Dylan going a little bit sideways. Let's see what happened. You can see he turned in just a little bit too soon, clipped the inside and stabilized the rear, and that put him into the wall. We check in with our race leader, and Marius is in control of this race. We'll bring up the current positions. Marius leads with Theo in second place. You can see Christopher less than a second behind him in third. Dylan has dropped off his pace, now 4 seconds behind in fourth. Ross will be looking to close that with 7 seconds. Duppy, he's in sixth place, had a very quiet race there, but still doing very well. Marshall's in seventh with Jacques Racing coming back up into eighth with Shane in ninth. Jakes, he's in 10th place with Mal Jacques down in 11th position. And Christopher's onslaught has been relentless, but Theo has been able to stand up to the challenge so far. Theo making his Porsche extremely difficult to overtake. Christopher not being able to find that opportunity. They'll come through turn number 12. Both of them using as much of that outside runoff as possible. Now into 13, then quick change into 14. Christopher's a little bit wide, but still safely on the track. No slowdown penalty will be awarded there. Little kick of the rear as Christopher powers out of that turn number 16. And Theo will hold this position for yet another lap. Shane going very defensive into turn number 1. Jakes decides to stay as wide as possible. Shane clips the wall. That's going to hurt his acceleration on the way out. Jakes is on the wider, longer route, but now down towards turn number 3. Jakes is on the inside wall. Shane have a look. No, he doesn't. He has to let Jakes go through. So Jakes now moves himself up into 9th place. Shane is now down into 10th. And that is still Mal Jacques in 11th place, looking to get himself back a few positions before the end of the race. So fighting to the end is exactly what we want. Shane will still need to contend with Mal Jacques behind him. Coming out of turn number 8. Now through turn number 9. Little flick of the rear for Shane. They'll go into turn 10. It looks like Shane straightens up. Oh, that was a little bit of lag. And there goes Jacques. Let's go see what had happened there. You can see Shane comes back. Jacques not affected. It's just on the power. The rear just unfortunately lets go and put Jacques in the wall, which that unfortunately will force him to retire. The second place driver, Theo, really driving the wheels off this Porsche. Theo still in a second place and has managed to pull a few car lengths ahead of Christopher. Coming out of a turn number 5. Christopher's wide. He might have to slow down. Theo driving a really an amazing race this evening. Christopher closing up that gap at the end of the straight. Christopher now looking for that opportunity. Christopher's wide, will lose momentum coming out of turn number 9. More breathing space there for Theo. Ross has also been able to keep this car on the track, and he is now starting to close that gap to a very, very limping Dylan. Dylan having caught the inside barrier coming out of turn number 16. Ross has smelt blood in the water, and now he's on a charge to close down those 7 seconds between himself and Dylan. See Dylan having just gone around turn number 12, so I'm sure Ross would be able to see him as well, and all that's going to do is just motivate him even more and try and get that place back from Dylan. There are 2 more laps left of this race, and Theo still has Christopher trying to hunt him down, looking for that opportunity. Little kick of the rear for Theo getting on that power. That Porsche obviously not liking that, or the tires starting to wear themselves down. Now through a Rouge and a Red Leon. Flat out, our camera guy is still sleeping on the job. We see the 2 drivers going past. Christopher tucked in behind in that slipstream and getting an advantage, but not close enough to make a pass into turn number 7. It will be single file through 8 as well as through turn 9. Opportunity for Christopher to possibly move to the inside into 10. He has a little look, but Theo goes defensive, but goes a little bit too hot. Christopher does see him coming, so it definitely comes off that power and allows Theo to go back into the lead. Out of turn number 11, Theo still is ahead of Christopher, now through turn number 12. A little bit of breathing space there for Theo. Will definitely come back to this action. Ross definitely closing up on Dylan. Only 3 seconds now separate them. So we have the end of this lap and 1 more to go. Christopher moves to the outside coming out of turn number 18. He's now on the inside into the chicane. Great move there by Christopher. Valiant effort there by Theo, being able to keep Christopher behind him for the last 7 laps or so. But unfortunately Christopher picked his moment and has been able to make that move stick. Christopher now up to 2nd with Theo down in 3rd position. Dylan has Ross screaming behind him. You can see how loose that car is. Dylan is loose once again, putting it back into the wall through turn number 18. You will see Ross coming, but will defend the inside, but is way too late on the brakes. The car did not stop. Ross struggling to get that power down. So Dylan will now lead this charge going into turn number 1. 1 more lap to go. Ross takes a look to the inside. Lock up there by Dylan. Ross will follow down the hill. Nervous moments here for Dylan through turns 3, through 4. Car understeers badly. We chase Ross and he sees Dylan going understeering, so he decides to go wide. In the process loses all that momentum. But Ross will still have a straight line speed advantage. Now into turn number 7. Ross getting that power on. Oh, a little flick of the rear. That's going to give Dylan some breathing space. Race leader coming into turns number 19 and 20 for the last time. Marius has really done well up front. Had some drivers to contend to, but they unfortunately had dropped out. So Marius will cross the line in first place. Christopher, he will come home having fought with Theo for so long in second place. Definitely the driver of the day will go to Theo, having held out as much of the challenge as he had from Christopher. He crosses the line in third place. Dylan will limp his car home. You can see how that car is not going in a straight line. So while Dylan will cross the line in fourth place, he will not finish fourth. It will be time penalties that will penalize him. He will unfortunately drop just behind Ross. So Ross will finish in fourth place while crossing the line in fifth. Little flash of the lights in appreciation for the great racing. Duppy very quiet this race, and he finds himself a solid sixth coming out of turn number 20 for that last time. A very disappointing race for Jacques Racing, definitely the fastest on the track. He will finish way down in 7th place. It will be Jake's, also our pole sitter. He will lose it going through turn number 5 on lap number 2. He will finish the race in 8th position. Shane, a disappointing result for him, having had most of his race in 3rd, and unfortunately Marshall will disconnect with 2 laps to go. So thank you very much guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed that. If you did, give this video a like, subscribe to our channel, and don't forget that notification button. We will be racing our final race at Nürburgring this coming Thursday, so be sure to tune in and watch the race from our point of view, with that final highlights and points coming out on the weekend. Just remember that this series was proudly brought to you by Thrustmaster and Mettlestate. So keep racing, and until then, thanks for watching. Yos.